Hi, welcome back to another tutorial. This time we're going to jump into Blender. I've been slowly kind of working on migrating from Cinema 4D into Blender, mostly because I just find that Blender seems to have more expanded capabilities than Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D is just super easy to use. It's kind of a language that I've spoken for the last 4 or 5 years, but I really want to try to figure out how I can kind of map my skills in Cinema 4D over to Blender. I also am trying to do some kind of interesting designs that we'll get to later that I found that Blender is the best pathway for doing that. So this video is really just all about getting started in Blender. So when you come into Blender and you open up a new general, you're just going to get this scene where you have a camera, a cube, and a light. All these items are individually selectable. And let's just make a really basic scene here, something that same place you'd start when you're in Cinema 4D. So what we're going to do is, first I'm going to show you, starting with our cube here, some of the things that we can do. So rather than kind of making it editable in Cinema 4D, we can just jump into edit mode, which I find nice because you don't have to actually make the cube editable and then it's permanently in editable mode in Cinema 4D. You can kind of jump back and forth between this object mode with just your simple controls of move, rotate, scale, and transform, and then expand that to have all of your extrusions and bevels and cuts that you can do. So when you're in edit mode, at the top here you're going to have a couple different things that you can select. So right now we're on our points mode or vertex selection. So the only thing I can select are my vertexes. I can't select any of my faces or my lines, only that. We can switch over to line mode, or we could just drag and select to drag multiple. Or we can go just into our faces mode, and that's just going to affect faces. And so, it's just like Cinema 4D. Once a face is selected, you drag it up and it's just going to expand the size of the cube. You're not adding any more vertexes or polygons. You're just expanding the size, essentially. What we can do is we can kind of play around with some of these tools down here while we're in edit mode. So one thing you can do is we'll select the whole cube. And now just keep in mind that when you drag and select like that, you're not going to select everything if you're in, let's say, vertex mode. And I select this, I'm going to miss that whole back section there because I'm missing a vertex. I just can't see it in the viewport. So a simple way around that is just hit A on the keyboard, and that basically just selects all based on whatever you have selected in your scene up here. So now what we can do is we can do some things like our loop cut, which is right now just set to being, at 50% for your first cuts. And then it will allow you to do, 50% of that and continue to cut so that everything's really proportional, which is kind of nice. So we have this proportional looking, Rubik's Cube here. What we can do is go into face mode and we can just start, well, obviously if you just drag it out, you're not doing an extrusion. We can start extruding these. So if you hit extrude region, it's just going to allow you to start kind of pulling these out like it's a filing cabinet. So we'll just kind of, again, I don't really have a plan here for much of an animation. This is going to come later because I'm still trying to do some things in Cinema 4D, but this will allow you to basically change the shape of it. Other things that you can do is in our vertex mode, we're going to hit all, is you can also right click on the object, and this will allow you to do things to the entire object. So we can deform it with this push pull and bulge our cube in and out, make some different shapes. And if you want to return, just click once and then hit Control-Z on your keyboard to get back. We can also do something called shear, which is just going to basically make it kind of lean one way or the other. And we can also do things that we do in Cinema 4D, like split these, separate these items you know, basically like you would do with like dissolving or connecting objects and deleting and stuff like that in Cinema 4D. So that's kind of a quick rundown. Obviously there's a ton of other things that you can do. So just jumping back into object mode, over here on the right hand side, everything up here is kind of our world settings. So if we wanted to you know, play with our render settings, they're all right here. One of the great things about Blender as opposed to Cinema 4D is the ability to have this bloom effect, which I'll show you guys later. But we can also change the dimensions of our scene, everything like that. That's all in here, kind of project settings. Here we go. We can kind of set some of the parameters within the project. And then we can even just change our background. So if you want to have, you know, a completely dark background, you can do. Well, sorry, I'm in viewport shading. But if we go to a different view here, this is our actual viewport shading. So that's why it wasn't affecting the lighting in that last one. But anyway, we can change the background colors, and then everything below here is going to be your collection properties. So that means whatever I have highlighted, I click this. Now I'm just changing the size of just that cube down here. So, you know, changing my X, my Y, and my Z. And then we have this thing called modifiers. And this is a whole volume of stuff that you can do that, you know, is similar to some of the things you can do in Cinema 4D. But I find there's even more modifiers here in Blender, and it takes even more training to kind of figure out how to use all of it. But you know, one of the things we can do that's interesting, and I'll have a whole tutorial on this, is do something called an array, where essentially I'm just basically taking that cube and I'm just extending it by a factor of 1. So that's basically just duplicating the object. If I did a factor of, let's say, 2, well, now I'm giving it a 1 object spacing between each of my items. So you can think of like so many different things you can do with like building fencing and pathways and steps and even buildings. Is you know, setting this to, let's say, 1.05, so you can kind of see that gap, and then we can just up the count, you know, and just have it, you know, have a whole array here, and then we can even play with the factor if we need it to be, you know, a kind of just like one column. We go obviously back to 1, and if we want separation, we can do this. Now, I'm not going to get into all the different ways that we can map modified or arrays onto different like splines, and in Blender they call those things curves as opposed to splines. So we're used to the spline tool in Cinema 4D, but a little bit different in here. So anyway, I've got this scene set up. Other things we can do, we want to just add something into the scene really quickly. Just hit Shift A on your keyboard, and we can add all the things that we're used to in Cinema 4D, like just adding a plane, and then, you know, we can quickly scale it up and, you know, kind of create a floor here. And now you can see my lighting and my shadows already casting over here. Finishing out here, we've got particle properties, which I haven't even gotten into yet. Different physics properties, so, you know, velocities and the force and collisions. So a lot of stuff we talked about in Cinema 4D. We can add constraints. Obviously, you know, making cubes stick to other cubes when they're moving around. Same track. Obviously, we can have like object buffers and stuff like that. Again, haven't gotten into that a whole lot. Object data properties. Again, this is just getting to be something that I haven't done quite yet. But then the important thing down here is going to be materials. So when we have our cube selected, we go to materials. All we're going to do is just kind of change our base color, and we're going to get a result. Now remember, this is in an array, so it's going to affect everything in that array when you change that color. So let's just get rid of this array for now. Just come back to here, and we'll talk about that in another tutorial. But anyway, back in our cube, you have all these different material settings. And yeah, so let's say you've made something way better than what I made, and you want to start taking a look at what it's going to look like when you're rendering it. Surprisingly, that took me a while to find, but it's super easy. Just go up to render, and you can hit F11 on your keyboard or hit view render, which is just kind of like a viewport render. Now, one thing to keep in mind is it's always going to be through the perspective of the camera. So whatever that camera is looking at, we need to know what that is. So if we go to view, we can jump into our active camera, and then from here in our object properties, we can start to change the position of our camera to frame everything up. So I'm gonna kind of just back this up till I get everything in frame, and just like that. Okay, so now once you've got it all lined up with your camera, what we can do is in the view tab, this is how we do a viewport render. So essentially just basically wanting to see our viewport, but you'll notice I can still see the line from my light in here. So it's meant just for you to, you know, to take a quick peek, like a preview in Cinema 4D as you're working. But if you want to fully render the scene either as an image or an animation, you can hit F12 or Shift F12, and now you're going to get it without that line, and you're going to have your render. So anyway, this has been a really quick tutorial on how to get started in Blender. We are just getting started, and I hope to learn with you guys and kind of take my knowledge from other 3D software and apply it to my learning techniques as I kind of dive into Blender here. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.